Part 3. The Power of the Key Principles. Chapter 11. The Power of the Capturing Habit. There's much more to these simple techniques and models than may appear at first glance. Indeed, they offer a systematic method to keep your mind distraction-free, ensuring a high level of efficiency and effectiveness in your work. That in itself would be sufficient reason to implement these practices. But there are even greater implications for the fundamental principles at work here. What follows in the next 3 chapters is an accounting of my experience over the past 30 years of the subtler and often more profound effects that can transpire from the implementation of these basic principles. The longer-term results can have a significant impact on you as an individual, and they can positively affect larger organizational cultures as well. When people with whom you interact notice that without fail you receive, process, and organize in an airtight manner the exchanges and agreements they have with you, they begin to trust you in a unique way. More significantly, you incorporate a level of self-confidence in your engagement with your world that money cannot buy. Such is the power of capturing placeholders for anything that is incomplete or unprocessed in your life. It noticeably enhances your mental well-being and improves the quality of your communications and relationships, both personally and professionally. And when organizations expect and reinforce this best practice of allowing nothing to fall through a communication crack, with everyone accountable for resulting actions, and commitments clarified and tracked by the appropriate persons, it can significantly increase a culture's productivity and reduce its stress. The personal benefit. How did it feel to go through the collecting and downloading activity? Most people say it feels so bad and yet so good. How can that be? If you're like most people who go through the full capturing process, you probably felt some form of anxiety. Descriptive terms like overwhelmed, panic, frustration, fatigue, and disgust tend to come up when I ask seminar participants to describe their emotions in going through a minor version of this procedure. And is there anything you think you've procrastinated on in that stack? If so, you have guilt automatically associated with it. I could have, should have, ought to have done this before now. At the same time, did you experience any sense of release or relief or control as you did the drill? Most people say yes, indeed. How does that happen? Totally opposite emotional states showing up as you're doing a single exercise, almost at the same time. Anxiety and relief, overwhelmed and in control. What's going on here? When you understand the source of your negative feelings about all your stuff, you'll discover, as I did, the way to get rid of them. And if you experienced any positive feelings from collecting your stuff, you actually began the process of eliminating the negativity yourself. The source of the negative feelings. Where do the not-so-good feelings come from? Too much to do? No, there's always too much to do. If you felt bad simply because there was more to do than you could do, you'd never get rid of that feeling. Having too much to do is not the source of the negative feeling. It comes from a different place. How have you felt when someone broke an agreement with you, told you they would meet you Thursday at 4 p.m. and never showed or called? How did that feel? Frustrating, I imagine. The price people pay when they break an agreement in the world is the disintegration of trust in the relationship, an automatic negative consequence. But what are all those things in your in-tray? Agreements you've made or at least implicitly accepted with yourself, things you somehow have told yourself you should deal with in some way. Your negative feelings are simply the result of breaking those agreements. They're the symptoms of disintegrated self-trust. If you tell yourself to draft a strategic plan, when you don't do it, you feel bad. Tell yourself to get organized, and if you fail to, welcome to guilt and frustration. Resolve to spend more time with your kids, and then don't, voila, anxious and overwhelmed. How do you prevent broken agreements with yourself? If the negative feelings come from broken agreements, you have 3 options for dealing with them and eliminating the negative consequences. First, don't make the agreement. Second, complete the agreement. Or third, renegotiate the agreement. All of these can work to get rid of the unpleasant feelings. Don't make the agreement. It probably felt pretty good to take a bunch of your old stuff, decide that you weren't going to do anything with it, and just shred, recycle, or toss it into the trash. One way to handle an incompletion in your world is to just say no. You'd lighten up a lot if you would just lower your standards. If you didn't care so much about things being up to a certain level, your parenting, your school system, your team's morale, the software code, you'd have fewer things to do or have attention on. It has been a popular concept in the self-help world that focusing on your values will simplify your life. I contend the opposite. The overwhelming amount of things that people have to do comes from their values. Values are critical elements for meaning and direction and decision-making, but don't kid yourself. The more you focus on them, the more things you're likely to feel responsible for taking action on. Your values make it easier for you to make choices, but don't think they will make things any simpler. I doubt you're going to lower your standards. But once you really understand the consequences, you'll probably make fewer agreements. I know I did. I used to make a lot of them just to win people's approval. When I realized the price I was paying on the back end for not keeping those agreements, I became a lot more conscious about the ones I made. One insurance executive I worked with described the major benefit he derived from implementation of this system. He said, "Previously, I would just tell everyone, 'Sure, I'll do it,' because I didn't know how much I really had to do. Now that I've got the inventory clear and complete, just to maintain my integrity, I have to say, 'No, I can't do that, I'm sorry.' The amazing thing is that instead of being upset with my refusal, everyone was impressed with my discipline." Another client, an entrepreneur in the personal coaching business, recently told me that making an inventory of his work had eliminated a huge amount of worry and stress from his life. The discipline of putting everything he had his attention on into his in-tray caused him to reconsider what he really wanted to do anything about. If he wasn't willing to toss a note about it into in, he just let it go. I consider that very mature thinking. One of the best things about this whole method is that when you really take on the responsibility to capture and track what's on your mind, you'll think twice about making commitments internally that you don't really need or want to make. In my many years of working with people to get their list of projects clear and current, every single person has decided that something was not worth doing that they thought they were committed to. Not being aware of all you have to do is much like having a credit card for which you don't know the balance or the limit. It's a lot easier to be careless with your commitments. Complete the agreement. Of course, another way to get rid of the negative feelings about your stuff is to just finish it and be able to mark it off as done. You actually love to do things as long as you get the feeling that you've completed something. If you've begun to take less than 2-minute actions as they surface in your life, I'm sure you can attest to the psychological benefit. Most people I work with feel fantastic after just a couple of hours of processing their piles, simply because of how many things they accomplish using the 2-minute rule. One of your better weekends may be spent just finishing up a lot of little errands and tasks that have accumulated around your house and in your personal life. Invariably, when you capture all the open loops, little and big, and see them on a list in front of you, some part of you will be inspired or creatively disgusted or intimidated enough to go knock them off the list. We all seem to be starved for a win. It's great to satisfy that by giving yourself doable tasks you can start and finish easily. Have you ever completed something that wasn't initially on a list, so you wrote it down and checked it off? Then you know what I mean. There's another issue here, however. How would you feel if your list and your stack were totally and successfully completed? You'd probably be bouncing off the ceiling, full of creative energy. Of course, within 3 days, if not 3 minutes, guess what you'd have? Right, another list, and probably an even bigger one, with more potentially daunting things to do on it. You'd feel so good about finishing all your stuff, you'd likely take on bigger, more ambitious things to do. Not only that, but if you have a boss or a board, what do you think he or she or they are going to do after noticing the high levels of competency and productivity you're demonstrating? Right again. Give you more things to do. It's the irony of professional development. The better you get, the better you'd better get. So, since you're not going to significantly lower your standards or stop creating more things to do, you'd better get comfortable with the third option if you want to keep from being stressed out. Renegotiate the agreement. Suppose I'd told you I would meet you Thursday at 4 p.m., but after I made the appointment, my world changed. Now, given my new priorities, I decide I'm not going to meet you Thursday at 4. But instead of simply not showing up, what had I better do to maintain the integrity of the relationship? Correct. Call and change the agreement. A renegotiated agreement is not a broken one. Do you understand yet why getting all your stuff out of your head and in front of you makes you feel better? Because you automatically renegotiate your agreements with yourself when you look at them, think about them, and either act on them that very moment or say, no, not now. Here's the problem. It's impossible to renegotiate agreements with yourself that you can't remember you made. The fact that you can't remember an agreement you made with yourself doesn't mean that you're not holding yourself liable for it. Ask any psychologist how much of a sense of past and future that part of your psyche has, the part that was storing the list you dumped. 0. It's all present tense in there. That means that as soon as you tell yourself that you should do something, if you file it only in your short-term memory, that part of you thinks you should be doing it all the time. And that means that as soon as you've given yourself 2 things to do and filed them only in your head, you've created instant and automatic stress and failure, because you can't do them both at once, and that, apparently significant part of your psyche will continue to hold you accountable. If you're like most people, you've probably got some storage area at home, maybe a basement that you told yourself a while back, maybe even 10 years ago, you ought to clean and organize. If so, there's a part of you that likely thinks you should have been cleaning your basement 24 hours a day for the past 10 years. No wonder people are so tired. And have you heard that little voice inside your own mental committee every time you walk by that area? Why are we walking by the basement? Aren't we supposed to be cleaning it? Because you can't stand that whining, nagging part of yourself, you never even go into that area anymore if you can help it. If you want to shut that voice up, you have 3 options for dealing with your agreement with yourself. 1. Lower your standards about your garage. You may have done that already. So I have a crappy garage. Who cares? 2. Keep the agreement. Clean the garage. 3. At least put clean garage on a someday maybe list. Then, when you review that list weekly and you see that item, you can tell yourself, not this week. The next time you walk by your garage, you won't hear a thing internally other than, ha, not this week. I'm quite sincere about this. It seems that there's a part of our consciousness that doesn't know the difference between an agreement about cleaning the basement and an agreement about buying a company or improving our personal finances. In there, they're all just agreements, kept or broken. If you're holding something only internally, it will be a broken agreement if you're not moving on it in the moment. The radical departure from traditional time management. This method is significantly different from traditional time management training. Most of those models leave you with the impression that if something you tell yourself to do isn't that important, it's not worth it to track, manage, or deal with. But in my experience, that's inaccurate, at least in terms of how a less than conscious part of us operates. It is how our conscious mind operates, however, so every agreement must be made conscious. That means it must be captured, clarified, and reviewed objectively and regularly in full conscious awareness so that you can put it where it belongs in your self-management arena. If that doesn't happen, it will actually take up a lot more of your internal energy than it deserves. In my experience, anything that is held only in your head will take up either more or less attention than it deserves. The reason to collect everything is not that everything is equally important. It's that it's not. Incompletions, uncaptured, take on a dull sameness in the sense of the pressure they create and the attention they tie up. How much capturing is required? You'll feel better collecting anything that you haven't captured yet. When you say to yourself, oh, that's right, I need to get butter the next time I'm at the store, and you write it on your grocery list, you'll feel better. When you remember, I've got to call my financial advisor about the trust fund, and you write that down someplace where you know you'll see it when you have a phone and time, you'll feel better. But there's still a light year's difference when you know you have it all. When will you know how much you have left in your head to capture? Only when there's nothing left. If some part of you is even vaguely aware that you don't have it all, you can't really know what percentage you have collected. How will you know when there's nothing left? When nothing else shows up as a reminder in your mind. This doesn't mean that your mind will be empty. If you're conscious, your mind will always be focusing on something. But if it's focusing on only one thing at a time, without distraction, you'll be in your zone. I suggest that you use your mind to think about things rather than think of them. You want to be adding value as you think about projects and situations, not creating stress by simply reminding yourself they exist and you need to do something about them. To fully realize that more productive place, you will need to capture it all. It takes focus and a change of habit to train yourself to recognize and download even the smallest agreements with yourself as they're created in your mind. Doing the capturing process as fully as you can, and then incorporating the behavior of gathering all the new things as they emerge, will be more empowering and productive than you can imagine. When relationships and organizations have the capture habit. What happens when everyone involved on a team, in a marriage, in a department, on a staff, in a family, in a company, can be trusted not to let anything slip through the cracks? Frankly, once you've achieved that, you'll hardly think about whether people are dropping the ball anymore. There will be much bigger and better things to occupy your attention. But if communication gaps are still an issue, there's likely some layer of frustration and a general nervousness in the relationship or the culture. Most people feel that without constant babysitting and hand-holding, things could disappear in the system and then blow up at any time. They don't realize that they're feeling this because they've been in this situation so consistently that they relate to it as if it were a permanent law like gravity. It doesn't have to be that way. I've noticed this for years. Good people who haven't incorporated these behaviors come into my environment, and they stick out like a sore thumb. I've lived with the standards of a clear head and hard, clean edges on in trays for more than 3 decades now. When a note sits idle in someone's in tray unprocessed, or when he or she nods, "Yes, I will," in a conversation but doesn't otherwise capture that in some way, my uh-oh bell rings. This is unacceptable behavior in my world. There are much bigger fish to fry than worrying about leaks in the system. I need to trust that any request or relevant information I put in an email, on a voicemail, in a conversation, or in a written note will get into the other person's system, and that it will be processed and organized soon and available for his or her review as an option for action. If the recipient is managing voicemails but not email and paper, I have now been hamstrung to use only his or her trusted medium. That should be unacceptable behavior in any organization that cares about whether things happen with the least amount of effort. When change is required, there must be trust that the initiatives for that change will be dealt with appropriately. Any intact system will ultimately be only as good as its weakest link, and often that Achilles heel is a key person's dulled responsiveness to communications in the system. I especially notice this when I walk around organizations where in trays are either non-existent or overflowing and obviously long unprocessed. These cultures usually suffer from serious interruptitis because they can't trust putting communications into the system. I come across executives whose calendars are insanely overbooked, but who, when they begin to give timely responses to their emails, experience a dramatic relief from that pressure. When their staff and others are getting what they need in terms of appropriate feedback and decisions through that virtual medium, they no longer need the kind of face-to-face time they previously tried to get with meetings. Where cultures do have solid systems, down through the low-tech level of paper communications, the clarity is palpable. It's hardly even a conscious concern, and everyone's attention is more focused. The same is true in families that have installed in trays. The parents, the children, the nanny, the housekeeper, or anyone else with whom family members frequently interact. People often grimace when I tell them that my wife and I put things in each other's in trays, even when we're sitting within a few feet of each other. To them, it seems cold and mechanical. Aside from being an act of politeness intended to avoid interrupting the other's work in progress, the practice actually fosters more warmth and freedom between us, because mechanical things are being handled in the system instead of tying up our attention on the relationship. Unfortunately, you can't legislate personal systems. Everyone must have his or her own way to deal with what he or she has to deal with. You can, however, hold people accountable for outcomes and for tracking and managing everything that comes their way, and you can give them the information in this book. Then, at least, they'll have no excuse for letting something fall through the cracks. This doesn't mean that everyone has to do everything. I hope I have described a way to relate to our knowledge-based world that provides room for everyone to have a lot more to do than he or she can do. The critical issue will be to facilitate a constant renegotiation process with all involved, so they feel okay about what they're not doing. That's real knowledge work at a more sophisticated level. But there's little hope of getting there without having bulletproof capture systems in play. Remember, you can't renegotiate an agreement with yourself that you can't remember you made. And you certainly can't renegotiate agreements with others that you and they have lost track of. When groups of people collectively adopt the 100% capture standard, they have a tight ship to sail. It doesn't mean they're sailing in the right direction, or even that they're on the right ship. It just means that the one they're on, in the direction it's going, is sailing with the most efficient energy it can. Chapter 12. The Power of the Next Action Decision. I have a personal mission to make what's the next action part of our global thought process. I envision a world in which no meeting or discussion will end and no interaction cease without a clear indication of whether or not some action is needed, and if it is, what it will be, or at least who has accountability for it. I envision organizations adopting a standard that anything that lands in anyone's field of awareness will be evaluated for action required and the resulting decisions managed appropriately. Imagine the freedom that would provide for people and organizations to focus their attention on bigger issues and opportunities. Over the years, I have noticed an extraordinary shift in energy and productivity whenever individuals and groups installed "what's the next action" as a fundamental and consistently asked question. As simple as the query seems, it is still somewhat rare to find it fully operational where it needs to be. One of the greatest challenges you may encounter is that once you have gotten used to what's the next action for yourself and those around you, interacting with people who aren't asking it can be highly frustrating. It clarifies things so quickly that dealing with people and environments that don't use it can seem nightmarish. We are all accountable for defining what, if anything, we are committed to make happen as we engage with others and ourselves. And at some point, for any outcome that we have an internal commitment to complete, we must make the decision about the next physical action required. There's a great difference, however, between making that decision when things show up and doing it when they blow up. The source of the technique. I learned this simple but extraordinary next action technique more than 30 years ago from a longtime friend and management consultant mentor of mine, Dean Acheson, no relation to the former U.S. Secretary of State. Dean had spent many prior years consulting with executives and researching what was required to free up the logjams many of them had regarding projects and situations they were involved in order to release and galvanize energy for significant change required in their organizations. One day, he just started picking up each individual piece of paper on an executive's desk and forcing him to decide what the very next thing was that he had to do to move it forward. The results were so immediate and so profound for the executive that Dean continued for years to perfect a methodology using that same question to process the entree. Since then, given what I've developed using Dean's insights, hundreds of thousands of people have been trained and coached with this key concept, and it remains a foolproof technique. This thought process is not something we're born doing, nor does it seem to come to us naturally. When you were born, it probably didn't occur to you to ask your mother, "So what are we doing here, and what's the next action, and who has it?" It is a learned technique of thinking, decision-making, and consciously directed focus. It will happen automatically for you when the situation obviously demands it, as in a crisis, or when the pressure in a situation, from the boss, a client, your child, or the unexpected circumstance, forces a next action decision to avert painful consequences. But incorporating this as a proactive behavior, before the circumstances are so obvious and action so immediately necessary, is an acquired practice. I am tempted but hesitant to use the word skill in this case. We all already have the ability to make a next action decision. We do it all the time, thousands of times a day, but mostly unconsciously. Yet making that decision before we have to about things we're committed to move on is a powerful and elegant cognitive behavior pattern that can be learned, practiced, and integrated. It is a core element of knowledge work athletics. And most people don't do it in that manner about even the most important things in their lives. Making it a part of your personal and organizational life never fails to improve both your productivity and peace of mind. Creating the option of doing. How could something so simple be so powerful? What's the next action? To help answer that question, I invite you to revisit for a moment your mind sweep list. Refer to Chapter 5. Or at least to think about all the projects that are probably sitting around in your head. Do you have a sense that any of them haven't been moving along as consistently and productively as they could be? You'll probably admit yes, indeed, a few have been a little bit stuck. If you haven't known for sure whether you needed to make a call, send an email, talk to someone, surf the web about something, or buy an item at the store as the very next thing to move on, it hasn't been getting done. What's ironic is that it would likely require only about 10 seconds of thinking to figure out what the next action would be for almost everything on your list. But it's 10 seconds of thinking and decision-making that most people haven't done about most things on their lists. For example, someone will have something like tires on a list. I then ask, "What's that about?" He responds, "Well, I need new tires on my car." So what's the next action? At that point, he usually wrinkles up his forehead, ponders for a few moments, and expresses his conclusion. "Well, I need to check the web for stores and prices for the tires." That's about how much time and cognitive investment is required to decide what the doing would look like on almost everything. It's just the few seconds of focused thinking that most people have not yet done about most of their still unfinished stuff. It will probably be true, too, that the person who needs tires on his car has had that on his radar for quite a while. It's also likely that he's been on his computer hundreds of times, often with just enough time and energy to take that action. Why didn't he do it? Because in that state of mind, the last thing in the world he felt like doing was considering all his projects, including getting tires, and what their next actions were. In those moments, he didn't feel like thinking at all. What he needed was to have already figured those things out. If he gets that next action thinking done, then when he happens to have 15 minutes before a meeting at his computer, and his energy is about 4.2 out of 10, he can look at the list of things to do and be delighted to see "research new tires" on it. That's something I can do and complete successfully, he'll think, and then he'll actually be motivated to surf the web about it just to experience the win of completing something useful in the time and energy window he's in. In this context, he'd be incapable of starting a large proposal draft for a client, but he has sufficient resources for searching the internet and getting simple information quickly. It's highly probable that at some point he'll look at a new set of tires on his car and feel on top of the world. Defining what real doing looks like on the most basic level and organizing placeholder reminders that we can trust are master keys to productivity enhancement and creating a relaxed inner environment. Often, even the simplest things are stuck because we haven't made a final decision yet about the next action. People in my seminars often have things on their lists like, "Get a tune-up for the car." Is "get a tune-up" a next action? Not unless you're walking out to your car with wrench in hand dressed to get greasy. So, what's the next action? I need to take the car to the garage. Oh, yeah, I need to find out if the garage can take it. I guess I need to call the garage and make the appointment. Do you have the number? Darn, no, I don't have the name and number for the garage. Fred recommended that garage to me, and I don't have that information. I knew something was missing in the equation. And that's often what happens with so many things for so many people. We glance at the project, and some part of us thinks, I don't quite have all the pieces between here and there. We know something is missing, but we're not sure what it is, so we quit. So what's the next action? I need to get the name and phone number. I guess I could get it from Fred. How could you do that? I can email Fred. So the next action really is email Fred for info regarding the garage. Did you notice how many steps had to be tracked back before we got to the real next action on this project? That's typical. Most people have many things just like that on their lists and on their minds. Why bright people procrastinate the most. It's really the smartest and most sensitive people who have the highest number of undecided things in their lives and on their lists. Why is that? Think of how our bodies respond to the images we hold in our minds. It appears that the nervous system can't tell the difference between a well-imagined thought and reality. To prove this to yourself, picture walking into a food market and approaching the brightly lit fruit and vegetable section. Are you there? Okay, now go to the citrus bins. Oranges, grapefruits, lemons. Now see the big pile of yellow lemons. There's a cutting board and a knife next to them. Take one of those big yellow lemons and cut it in half lengthwise. Smell that citrus smell. It's really juicy, and there's lemon juice trickling onto the board. Now take a half lemon and cut that in half so you have a quarter lemon wedge in your hands. Okay, now, remember how you did this as a kid? Put that quarter of a lemon in your mouth and bite into it. Scrunch. If you played along with me, you probably noticed that the saliva content in your mouth increased at least a bit. Your body was actually trying to process citric acid, and it was just in your mind. If your body responds to the pictures you give it, how are you likely to feel physically when you think about, say, doing your taxes? Are you sending yourself easy, let's go, completion, success, and I'm a winner pictures? Probably not. For just that reason, what kinds of people would logically be the most resistant to being reminded about a project like that? That is, who would procrastinate the most? Of course, it would be the most creative, sensitive, and intelligent people, because their sensitivity and creativity give them the capability to produce in their minds lurid nightmare scenarios about what might be involved in doing the project and all the negative consequences that might occur if it isn't done perfectly. They just freak out in an instant and quit. Who doesn't procrastinate? Often it's the insensitive oafs who just take something and start plodding forward, unaware of all the things that could go wrong. Everyone else tends to get hung up about all kinds of things. Do my taxes? Oh no, it's not going to be that easy. It's going to be different this year, I'm sure. I saw the forms. They look different. There are probably new rules I'm going to have to figure out. I might have to read all that damn material. Long form, short form, medium form. File together with my partner. File separate. We'll probably want to claim some new deductions, but if we do, we'll have to back them up. And that means we'll need all the receipts. Oh my God, I don't know if we really have all the receipts we'll need. And what if we didn't have all the receipts, but we claimed the deductions anyway, and we got audited? Audited? Oh no, tax fraud, jail. And so a lot of people psychologically put themselves in jail just glancing at their tax forms, because they're so smart, sensitive, and creative. In my many years of coaching individuals, this pattern has been borne out more times than I can count. Usually it's the brightest and most sophisticated folks who have the most stuck piles in their offices, homes, email, and heads. Most of the executives I work with have at least several big, complex, and amorphous projects stacked either on top of a file cabinet or on a mental shelf. There always seem to be hobgoblin thoughts lurking inside them. If we don't look at or think about the projects, maybe they'll stay quiet. So what's the solution? There's always having a drink. Numb it. Dumb it down. Notice what happens to many people when they get a little alcohol in their brain. It should drop their energy immediately because it's a depressant. Often, though, the energy lifts, at least initially. Why? The alcohol is depressing something. It's shutting down the negative self-talk and uncomfortable visions that are going on in these folks' minds. Of course my energy will increase if I stop depressing myself with overwhelming pictures of not handling something successfully. But the numbing solutions are temporary at best. The stuff doesn't go away. And unfortunately, when we numb ourselves, we can't do it selectively. The source of inspiration and enthusiasm and personal energy also seems to get numbed. Intelligent dumbing down. There is another solution. Intelligently dumbing down your brain by figuring out the next action. You'll invariably feel a relieving of pressure about anything you have a commitment to change or do when you decide on the very next physical action required to move it forward. Nothing essentially will change in the world, but shifting your focus to something that your mind perceives as a doable task will create a real increase in positive energy, direction, and motivation. If you have truly captured all the things that have your attention during the mind sweep, go through the list again now and decide on the single very next action to take on every one of them. Notice what happens to your energy. You are either attracted or repelled by the things on your lists. There isn't any neutral territory. You are either positively drawn toward completing the action, or reluctant to think about what it is and resistant to getting involved in it. Often it's simply the next action decision that makes the difference between the two extremes. Thinking and deciding require energy. And when you notice something unfinished in your world, but haven't determined what the next action is yet, you'll tend to be reminded of your fatigue and sense of being overwhelmed. Hence, most people's reaction to their own lists and organizers is negative, not because of the contents per se, but rather because sufficient appropriate thinking has yet to be applied to them. In following up with people who have begun to implement this methodology, I've discovered that one of the subtler ways many of them fall off the wagon is in letting their action lists grow back into lists of tasks or sub-projects instead of discrete next actions. They're still ahead of most people because they're actually writing things down, but they often find themselves stuck and procrastinating because they've allowed their action lists to harbor items like meeting with the banquet committee, Johnny's birthday, receptionist, slide presentation. In other words, things have morphed back into stuff instead of starting at the action level. There are no clear next actions here, and anyone keeping a list filled with items like this would send her brain into overload every time she looked at it. Is this extra work? Is figuring out the next action on your commitments additional effort that you don't need to expend? No, of course not. If you need to get your car tuned, for instance, you're going to have to figure out that next action at some point anyway. The problem is that most people wait to do it until the next action is call the auto club for tow truck. So when do you think most people really make a lot of their next action decisions about their stuff? When it shows up or when it blows up? And do you think there might be a difference in the quality of their lives if they handled this knowledge work on the front end instead of the back? Which do you think is the more efficient way to move through life? Deciding next actions on your projects as soon as they appear on your radar screen, and then efficiently grouping them into categories of actions that you get done in certain uniform contexts? Or avoiding thinking about what exactly needs to be done until it has to be done, then sputtering through your actions as you try to catch up and put out the fires? That may sound exaggerated, but when I ask groups of people to estimate when most of the action decisions are made in their companies, with few exceptions, they say, when things blow up. One of our global corporate clients surveyed its population about sources of stress in its culture, and the number one complaint was the last-minute crisis work consistently promoted by team leaders who failed to make appropriate decisions on the front end. The value of a next action decision-making standard. I have had several sophisticated senior executives tell me that installing "what's the next action" as an operational standard in their organization was transformative in terms of measurable performance output. It changed their culture permanently and significantly for the better. Why? Because the question forces clarity, accountability, productivity, and empowerment. Clarity. Too many discussions end with only a vague sense that people know what they have decided and are going to do. But without a clear conclusion that there is a next action, much less what it is and who's got it, more often than not, a lot of stuff gets left up in the air. I am frequently asked to facilitate meetings. I've learned the hard way that no matter where we are in the conversation, 20 minutes before the agreed end time of the discussion, I must force the question, "So, what's the next action here?" In my experience, there is usually 20 minutes worth of clarifying and sometimes tough decisions still required to come up with an answer. This is radical common sense. Radical because it often compels discussion at deeper levels than people are comfortable with. Are we serious about this? Do we really know what we're doing here? Are we really ready to allocate precious time and resources to this? It's very easy to avoid these more relevant levels of thinking. What prevents those issues from slipping away into amorphous stuff is forcing the decision about the next action. Some further conversation, exploration, deliberation, and negotiation are often needed to put the topic to rest. The world is too unpredictable these days to permit assumptions about outcomes. We need to take responsibility for moving things to clarity. You have to have some experience of this to really know what I mean here. If you do, you're probably saying to yourself, yes. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, I suggest that in your next meeting with anyone, you end the conversation with the question, so what's the next action here? Then notice what happens. Accountability. The dark side of collaborative cultures is the allergy they foster to holding anyone responsible for having the ball. Mine or yours is unfortunately not in the common vocabulary of many such organizations. There is a sense that that would be impolite. We're all in this together is a worthy sentiment, but seldom a reality in the hard-nosed day-to-day world of work. Too many meetings end with a vague feeling among the players that something ought to happen and the hope that it's not their personal job to make it so. The way I see it, what's truly impolite is allowing people to walk away from discussions unclear. Real togetherness of a group is reflected by the responsibility that all take for defining the real things to do and the specific people assigned to do them, so everyone is freed of the angst of still undecided actions. Again, if you've been there, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, test it out. Take a small risk and ask, so what's the next action on this, at the end of each discussion point in your next staff meeting, or in your next family conversation around the dinner table. Productivity. Organizations naturally become more productive when they model and train front-end next-action decision-making. For all the reasons mentioned, determining the required physical allocation of resources necessary to make something happen as soon as the outcome has been clarified will produce more results sooner and with less effort. Learning to break through the barriers of the sophisticated creative thinking that can freeze activity, that is, the entangled mental webs we spin, is a superior skill. Productivity has been touted for decades as a desirable thing to improve in organizations. Anything that can help maximize output will do that. But in the world of knowledge work, all the computers and telecom improvements and leadership seminars on the planet will make no difference in this regard unless the individuals involved increase their operational responsiveness. And that requires thinking about something that lands in your world before you have to. One of the biggest productivity leaks I have seen in some organizations is the lack of next actions determined for long-term projects. Long-term does not mean someday maybe. Those projects with distant goal lines are still to be done as soon as possible. Long-term simply means more action steps until it's done, not no need to decide next actions because the day of reckoning is so far away. When every project and open loop in an organization is being monitored, it's a whole new ballgame. Empowerment. Perhaps the greatest benefit of adopting the next action approach is that it dramatically increases your ability to make things happen with a concomitant rise in your self-esteem and constructive outlook. People are constantly doing things, but usually only when they have to, under fire from themselves or others. They get no sense of winning, or of being in control, or of cooperating among themselves and with their world. People are starving for those experiences. The daily behaviors that define the things that are incomplete and the moves that are needed to complete them must change. Getting things going of your own accord, before you're forced to by external pressure and internal stress, builds a firm foundation of self-worth that will spread to every aspect of your life. You are the captain of your own ship. The more you act from that perspective, the better things will go for you. Asking yourself, what's the next action, undermines the victim mentality. It presupposes that there is a possibility of change and that there is something you can do to make it happen. That is the assumed affirmation in the behavior. And these kinds of assumed affirmations often work more fundamentally to build a positive self-image than can repeating, I am a powerful, effective person making things happen in my life 1,000 times. Is there too much complaining in your culture? The next time someone moans about something, try asking, so what's the next action? People will complain only about something that they assume could be better than it currently is. The action question forces the issue. If it can be changed, there's some action that will change it. If it can't, it must be considered part of the landscape to be incorporated in strategy and tactics. Complaining is a sign that someone isn't willing to risk moving on a changeable situation, or won't consider the immutable circumstance in his or her plans. This is a temporary and hollow form of self-validation. Although my colleagues and I rarely promote our work in this way, I notice people really empowering themselves every day as we coach them in applying the next action technique. It increases the light in their eyes and the lightness in their step, and a sparkle shows up in their thinking and demeanor. We are all already powerful, but deciding on and effectively managing the physical actions required to move things forward seems to exercise that power in ways that call forward the more positive aspects of our nature. When you start to make things happen, you begin to believe that you can make things happen, and that makes things happen. Chapter 13. The Power of Outcome Focusing. The power of directing our mental and imaginative processes to create change has been studied and promoted in thousands of contexts, from early positive thinking books to recent discoveries in advanced neurophysiology. My own interest has been in applying the principle in terms of practical reality. Does it help get things done? And if so, how do we best utilize it in managing the work of our lives? Can we really use this information in ways that allow us to produce what we want to have happen with less effort? The answer has been a resounding yes. Focus and the fast track. Over the years, I have seen the application of the method presented in this book create profound results for people in their day-to-day worlds. As you begin to use it habitually as your primary means of addressing all situations, from processing emails to buying a house or a company, to structuring meetings or having conversations with your kids, your personal productivity can go through the roof. Many of the professionals I have worked with who integrated this method now find themselves experiencing enhanced or even new jobs, careers, and lifestyles. These processes really work in the arena of the ordinary things we must deal with daily, the stuff of our work. When you demonstrate to yourself and to others an increasing ability to get things done in the trenches, you probably won't stay in the same trench for very long. Of course, those attracted to implementing getting things done are usually already on a self-development path and don't assume that they'll be doing the same things a year from now that they're doing now anyway. But they love the fact that this method gets them there faster and more easily. It's interesting to note that the people who need this methodology the least are usually the ones who engage with it the quickest and the most. That puzzled me for a while until I realized that one of the most important results of its implementation is the relief of drag, as in retarding force. Who is the most interested in that? Those who are the most invested in moving themselves forward quickly and easily. It's been inspiring for me to learn and coach others how to deal with the immediate realities down where the rubber meets the road, and how to tie in the power of positive imagery to practical experiences in all our daily lives. The fast track alluded to here is a bit of a misnomer. For some, slowing down, getting out of the squirrel cage, and taking care of themselves may be the major change precipitated by this methodology. An interesting phenomenon I have noticed more than once is that for some highly energetic people, incorporating the getting things done mindset turbocharges their busy and creative lifestyle to a new level of discomfort. Now I can really get a lot more done and faster. And they then take the opportunity for healthy self-examination about how important that really is versus more quality of life kinds of outcomes they may crave. The bottom line is it makes you more conscious, more focused, and more capable of implementing the changes and results you want, whatever they are. Create a way to spend more time with my daughter is as specific a project as any, and equally demanding of a next action to be determined. Having the vague, gnawing sense that you should do something about your relationship with your daughter and not actually doing anything can be a killer. I often work with people who are willing to acknowledge the real things of their lives at this level as incompletes, to write them down, define real projects about them, and ensure that next actions are decided on until the finish line is crossed. That is real productivity, perhaps in its most awesome manifestation. The significance of applied outcome thinking. What I want to emphasize now is how learning to process the details of our work and lives with this clear and consistent system can affect us and others in significant ways we may not expect. As I've said, employing next action decision-making results in clarity, productivity, accountability, and empowerment. Exactly the same results happen when you hold yourself to the discipline of identifying the real results you want, and more specifically, the projects you need to define in order to produce them. It's all connected. You can't really define the right action until you know the outcome you're after, and your outcome is disconnected from reality if you're not clear about what you need to do physically to make it happen. You can get at it from either direction, and you must to get things done. As Stephen Snyder, an expert in whole brain learning and a friend of mine, put it, there are only two problems in life. One, you know what you want and you don't know how to get it, and or two, you don't know what you want. If that's true, and I think it is, then there are only two solutions. Make it up, make it happen. This can be construed from the models of yin-yang, right brain, left brain, creator-destroyer, visionary implementer, or whatever equivalent framework works best for you. The truth is, our energy as human beings seems to have a dualistic and teleological reality. We create and identify with things that aren't yet real on all the levels we experience, and when we do, we recognize how to restructure our current world to morph it into the new one and experience an impetus to make it so. Things that have your attention need your intention engaged. What does this mean to me? Why is it here? What do I want to have be true about this? What's the desired outcome? Everything you experience as incomplete must have a reference point for complete. Once you've decided that there is something to be changed and a mold to fill, you ask yourself, how do I now make this happen? And or what resources do I need to allocate to make it happen? What's the next action? By this point, you've probably noticed that getting things done is not some new technology or invention. It simply makes explicit the principles at work within what we all do implicitly. But with that awareness, you can then leverage those principles consciously to create more elegant results. Your life and work are made up of outcomes and actions that you engage in more or less consciously. Whether they are merely less than conscious responses to your environment or more conscious results of your directed focus is the choice you will always have. If you have any intention to expand your experiences and expressions beyond simply being at the mercy of the world as it comes at you, the opportunity is there to recognize, develop, and master the art of getting things done. The challenge will continually be to apply the two essential elements of this art, defining what done means and what doing looks like. This is not always that easy, especially when dealing with some of the more subtle and sublime areas of your life experience. But without challenges, you would never learn or grow. The good news is that when your operational behavior is grooved to engage with everything that comes your way at all levels, based upon those dynamics, a deep alignment occurs and wondrous things emerge. You become highly productive. You make things up and you make them happen. The magic of mastering the mundane. People often wonder how I can sit with them at their desks, often for hours on end, as they empty their drawers, unpack all their unprocessed emails, and painstakingly go through the minutiae of stuff that they have let accumulate in their minds and their physical and virtual spaces. Aside from the common embarrassment they feel about the volume of their irresponsibly dealt with details, they assume I should be bored to tears. Quite the contrary. Much to my own surprise, I find it to be some of the most engaging work I do with people. I know the release and relief and freedom that sit on the other side of dealing with these things effectively. I know that we all need practice and support and a strong, clear focus to get through them until we have the built-in standards and behaviors we need to engage with them as they demand. Every time I notice a client identifying something in his environment or mind that is pulling on him, and in a few moments he processes it to silence, I know he's deepening a critically important pattern of behavior. and I know how significant a change these people may then experience in their relationships with their bosses, their partners, their spouses, their kids, and themselves over the next few hours and, we hope, days and years. It's not boring. It's some of the best work I do. Multi-level outcome management. I'm in the focus business. As a consultant, coach, and educator, I ask simple questions that often elicit very creative and intelligent responses from others, and even myself, which in turn add value to the situation and work at hand. People aren't any smarter after these sessions than they were before. They just direct and utilize their intelligence more productively. What's unique about the practical focus of GTD is the combination of effectiveness and efficiency that these methods can bring to every level of your reality. There are lots of inspirational sources for the high-level purpose, values, vision kind of thinking, and many more mundane tools for getting hold of smaller details such as phone numbers and appointments and grocery lists. The world has been rather barren, however, of practices that relate equally to both levels and tie them together. What does this mean to me? What do I want to be true about it? What's the next step required to make that happen? These are the cornerstone questions we must answer at some point about everything. This thinking and the tools that support it will serve you in ways you may not yet imagine. The power of natural planning. The value of natural project planning is that it provides an integrated, flexible, aligned way to think through any situation. Whereas the basic 5-step process of capturing, clarifying, organizing, reflecting, and engaging is a coherent way to achieve stability across the whole spectrum of your life, natural planning produces relaxed, focused control in more specific areas. Challenging the purpose of anything you may be doing is healthy and mature. Being comfortable making up visions of success before the methods are clear is a phenomenal trait to strengthen. Being willing to have ideas, good or bad, and to express and capture all of them without judgment is critical for fully accessing creative intelligence. Honing multiple ideas and types of information into components, sequences, and priorities aimed toward a specific outcome is a necessary mental discipline. And deciding on and taking real next actions, actually moving on something in the physical world, is the essence of productivity. Being able to bring all these ingredients together with appropriate timing and balance is perhaps the major component of competence for this new millennium. But it's not yet the norm of much professional and personal behavior. Far from it. It's still a daunting task to apply this awareness to all the aspects of one's life. The natural planning model is natural, but in many cases it is not automatic. But even when only portions of the model are inserted, tremendous benefit ensues. The feedback I've gotten over the years with this model has continued to validate that even the slightest increase in the use of natural planning can bring significant improvement. To see brainstorming about almost every aspect of their lives becoming a standard for so many people is terrific. To hear from executives who have used the model as a way to frame key meetings and discussions and have gotten great value from doing so is gratifying. It all just affirms that the way our minds naturally work is what we should focus on to make anything happen in the physical world. The model is simply the basic principle of determining outcomes and actions for everything we consider to be our work. When those two key focus points become the norm in our day-to-day lives, the baseline for productivity moves to another level. The addition of brainstorming, the most creative means of expressing and capturing ideas, perspectives, and details about projects, makes for an elegant set of behaviors for staying relaxed and getting things done. Shifting to a positive organizational culture. It doesn't take a big change to increase the productivity standards of a group. I continually get feedback indicating that with a little implementation by a few key people, immediately things start to happen more quickly and more easily. The constructive evaluation of activities, asset allocations, communications, policies, and procedures against purposes and intended outcomes has become increasingly critical for every organization I know of. The challenges to our companies continue to mount, with pressures coming these days from globalization, competition, technology, shifting markets, erratic economic swings, and raised standards of performance and production, making outcome-action thinking a required 21st century behavior. What do you want to have happen in this meeting? What is the purpose of this form? What would the ideal person for this job be able to do? What do we want to accomplish with this software? These and a multitude of other similar questions are still sorely lacking in many quarters. There's plenty of talk in the big meetings that sounds good, but learning to ask, why are we doing this, and what will it look like when it's done successfully, and to apply the answers at the day-to-day operational level, that will create profound results. Commonly, the productivity issues expressed at senior levels in companies we work with are centered around email and meetings, too many of both, and too much time having to be spent dealing with seemingly non-strategic stuff within them. It is very easy for these communication media to morph into an unproductive maelstrom, draining energy. Unfocused meetings lead to unnecessary emails, which then produce the need for clarifying meetings, which produce more email, and so on. Both email and meetings are critical to organizational life, but too often they fall into the category of necessary evils, primarily because there is a lack of rigor relative to their purposes and desired outcomes. Empowerment naturally ensues for individuals as they move from complaining and victim modalities into outcomes and actions defined for direction. When that becomes the standard in a group, it creates significant improvement in the atmosphere as well as in the output. There are enough problems and opportunities to be concerned with. Negativity and passive resistance need to continually give way to a focus on the desired results at the appropriate horizons. The microcosm of how people deal with their in-trays, email, and the conversation with others will be reflected in the macro reality of their culture and organization. If balls are dropped, if decisions about what to do are resisted on the front end, if not all the open loops are managed responsibly, that will be magnified in the group, and the culture will sustain a stressful fire and crisis siege mentality. If, in contrast, individuals are implementing the principles of getting things done, the culture will expect and experience a new standard of high performance. Problems and conflicts will not go away. They remain inherent as you attempt to change or maintain anything in this world. The operational behaviors of this book, however, will provide the focus and framework for addressing them in the most productive way. I am often asked, how can this methodology improve an organization? In fact, all the principles I put forward are as applicable to an enterprise as they are to an individual. Capturing what has a group's attention, getting clarity about the inherent outcomes desired and actions required, regularly reviewing status and incorporating new realities, and consistently recalibrating and reallocating resources, all are core best practices for any team or company. But just like you can't teach an organization to read, you can't expect to improve an organization per se with getting things done. To function at all in a knowledge economy, most organizations need people who read. The culture can provide training and support to ensure that occurs. They will also need people who have mastered the art of effectively getting things done to operate at the new levels being demanded in this century. When that is manifest in a company through its expectations, training, and modeling from the top down, the results in organizational output can be profound. Chapter 14. GTD and Cognitive Science. Since the first edition of Getting Things Done was published, significant research in the field of social and cognitive psychology has documented and validated the efficacy of the principles that underlie the methodology. Until recently, these practices could be confirmed only experientially and anecdotally. Anyone who had ever applied the GTD techniques of capturing, clarifying, organizing, and reflecting on the resulting inventory acknowledged the same results: greater clarity, control, and focus, along with all the resulting personal and organizational benefits associated with that experience. If you have to any degree begun to implement the practices I've put forward so far, you will no doubt have noticed some positive increase in your own demeanor. Rigorous studies compiled by experts in the field of cognitive science, ranging from personal to organizational aspects, have begun to provide data that gives foundational support to this methodology and why and how its improvements are produced. In some sense, this may seem like someone's proving that gravity exists after we've all been experiencing it and dealing with it since we were conscious. But from another perspective, it gives perhaps needed credence to the advice for mastering workflow I've put forward here, and to why such seemingly simple processes and behaviors described in getting things done have such a compelling result. The supporting research has emerged within several frameworks and categories: positive psychology, distributed cognition, the value of an external mind, relieving the cognitive load of incompletions, flow theory, self-leadership theory, goal striving via implementation intentions, and psychological capital, PsyCap. GTD and positive psychology. In 2000, Martin Seligman took on the presidency of the American Psychological Association. For his presidential address, he challenged the profession to shift its focus away from simply describing, studying, and diagnosing the negative aspects of the human condition, and to begin devoting more attention to the positive aspects of what it means to be human. Of course, his message was simply a more mainstream embodiment of Abraham Maslow's idea from the mid-20th century of personal fulfillment as the richest arena of psychology. But since Seligman's call to action, positive psychology has blossomed into a full-fledged component of the field. The research generated by this change in perspective has been conducted at both the basic and applied levels. It has added to our understanding of a myriad of psychological constructs and has been used to improve the lives of many. Positive psychology is a vast discipline, but a sampling of its relevant aspects includes happiness, psychological well-being, flow, optimal experience, meaning, passion, purpose, authentic leadership, strengths, values, character, and virtue. Graduate education programs in these areas have emerged across the world and continue to expand. How is this relevant to getting things done? GTD is more than just a way to manage tasks and projects. In many respects, it is more concerned with fundamental issues of meaningful work, mindful living, and psychological well-being than simply offering methods for being more efficient or productive for their own sake. The emphasis and requirement of outcome thinking concerning the stuff we encounter, as well as achieving a functional way to capture, clarify, organize, and assess the results so we can think more clearly, describes the core practices that truly make the actual experience of life better. That said, and experienced if you have, it is still quite interesting to examine some of the various theories and studies that have focused on the more specific aspects of the relationship of our psyche, our well-being, and our performance, all with close correlation to the principles and practices of getting things done. Distributed cognition, the value of an external mind. In 2008, a fascinating paper, Getting Things Done, The Science Behind Stress-Free Productivity, was published in a professional journal by Francis Heiligen and Clément Vidal, two researchers in Belgium who analyzed my methodology specifically from the perspective of verifiable data and working theories from cognitive science. Their brilliant and detailed assessments and conclusions extend far beyond what I can do justice to here. The paper is worthy of multiple reads, but suffice it to say that its thesis is profound. Your mind is designed to have ideas based upon pattern detection, but it isn't designed to remember much of anything. Because of the way the mind developed, it is brilliant at recognition but terrible at recall. You can glance at today's calendar and in the course of a few seconds get a coherent sense of the day and its contents and contexts, but you'd have a terrible time trying to recall the contents of the next 14 days on your calendar merely from memory. A wonderful exposition of the new discoveries in the science of cognition related to our limited capacity to manage and maintain awareness of relevant data in the information age, and the necessity of building and utilizing an external brain, was put forward by Daniel Levitin in his book, The Organized Mind. The bottom line is that when you use your memory as your organizing system, as most everyone on the planet still does for most of what they're doing to manage their lives, your mind will effectively become overwhelmed and incompetent because you are demanding of it intense work for which it is not well equipped. If, however, you're able to bring its attention to bear appropriately and efficiently to create the optimal triggers for later thinking and action, such as reading an email, then setting a meeting on your calendar to deal with its issue or opportunity. Then it gets to relax and rely on the automatic and elegant thinking it can do when presented specific things on which to focus in the proper context. You trust you'll see that meeting on your calendar sufficiently in advance to be prepared for it. GTD provides the methodology for identifying those things that need focused attention, applying it efficiently on the front end, and organizing the triggers for appropriate thinking at the right time. The Belgian researchers crafted an elegant exposition of the science behind efficiently maximizing what our minds are good for and what they're not, creating a framework for how we can more effectively produce profound results with minimal thinking. Heiligen's background and experience is in analyzing insect behavior, how relatively brainless creatures produce phenomenally effective results. He makes a fascinating case for us humans to do likewise, with getting things done as a key platform. Relieving the cognitive load of incompletions. Much fruitful work has been done in the early part of this century by Dr. Roy Baumeister and others in determining the effects on consciousness of unfinished items, goals, projects, outcomes, etc., that have been committed to but not yet completed. His conclusions simply verify what I've experienced for decades. Uncompleted tasks take up room in the mind, which then limits clarity and focus. But interestingly, in alignment with the GTD practices, Baumeister has also proven that completion of such items is not required to relieve that burden on the psyche. What is needed is a trusted plan that ensures forward engagement will happen. In Baumeister's model, merely determining the next action to fulfill a commitment is a sufficient end result of planning, as long as the trigger or reminder is parked in a place that we trust will look within a reasonable amount of time. My thinking and model were heavily cited in his wonderful book, Willpower, which positions them within a rich context of managing the mental muscle we must continually employ, especially in knowledge work. Flow theory. One of the more popular concepts in this field, which has often been associated with GTD, has been the idea of flow, the state of optimal performance and engagement. Check out Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's book, Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience, for more details. Flow is what the athletes refer to as being in the zone, and it can be closely correlated with the idea of mind like water, which I introduced in the first chapter. The flow experience is marked by various distinct components, several of which are already implemented by the GTD approach. To experience flow, it is necessary that your skills in a given task match the challenge at hand. If the challenge exceeds your requisite skill level, you will experience anxiety, and if your skills exceed the challenge, you will most likely feel bored during the activity. Flow is usually accompanied by complete concentration on the given task, and you typically feel in control and have clear goals in sight. Individuals in flow generally have an idea of what is coming next and receive immediate feedback throughout the task. They also experience a merging of action and awareness, during which they lose both their self-consciousness and their sense of time. They are usually intrinsically motivated, performing an activity for its own sake and not for an external reward. Those in flow often are performing at an optimal level and are completely absorbed in what they are doing. Once individuals have experienced flow, they are often compelled to repeat the activities that enabled them to experience it. While flow was originally conceptualized by investigating leisure activities, for example, rock climbing, painting, Csikszentmihalyi and Lefebvre found that individuals are engaged in high-skill, high-challenge activities more often at work, 54%, than at leisure, 18%. Csikszentmihalyi explained that many jobs inherently contain the type of goals and feedback structures that would allow one to experience flow at work, a phenomenon that is associated with higher levels of subjective well-being. The GTD approach includes several conditions of the flow experience, namely having clear goals and receiving feedback. GTD's emphasis on focusing attention on one task at a time is closely associated with the crux of the flow experience, being completely absorbed in a singular activity, in which one's stimulus field is limited. Adopting GTD enables individuals to find flow more easily in their work and personal lives. By getting tasks out of the mind and into an external system, they can more easily see and track progress, which is a form of feedback. Having a complete picture of one's commitments in work and life can help individuals make better decisions about what to pay attention to in any given moment, which, in turn, will allow them to engage more fully in the task at hand, making flow a more likely outcome. Self-leadership theory. Self-leadership can be traced back to the mid-1980s as an expansion of the concept of self-management. According to Christopher Neck and Charles Mance, self-leadership is a process through which individuals control their own behavior, influencing themselves through the use of specific behavioral and cognitive strategies. The popularity of self-leadership has soared via a large number of practitioner-oriented books, theoretical and empirical journal publications, inclusion in management and leadership textbooks, and the growth of self-leadership training programs. The strategies that comprise self-leadership are commonly separated into three categories: behavior-focused, natural reward, and constructive thought pattern. Behavior-focused strategies are usually centered on raising individual self-awareness with the goal of facilitating behavioral management. In the context of work, these strategies commonly place an emphasis on doing necessary but unpleasant tasks. This family of strategies includes self-observation, self-goal setting, self-reward, self-punishment, and self-cueing. Natural reward strategies are intended to create situations in which an individual is motivated or rewarded by the activity itself. These strategies revolve around reshaping unpleasant tasks or activities to make them more enjoyable and deliberately focusing attention on the inherently rewarding aspects of the activities. Constructive thought pattern strategies relate specifically to creating ways of thinking that can positively impact performance. Examples of these strategies include self-talk, mental imagery, and replacing dysfunctional beliefs and assumptions. There are aspects of GTD that connect to each of the three overall types of self-leadership. One of the most evident is the concept of self-cueing. A well-constructed GTD system provides for a physical artifact that spurs future action. The GTD methodology also embodies the component of natural reward strategies. There is a sense of pleasure in identifying small, yet annoying tasks and taking care of them, something a thorough mental ram dump and some free time certainly make possible. Finally, a key element of GTD is the mental component of thinking of your work not simply as a series of large projects, but more directly as concrete next actions. This shift from a defeatist, overwhelmed attitude to the motivational state that enables you to move forward on such tasks is a great example of shifting your mindset in a positive way. Using self-leadership strategies has been shown to improve people's sense of self-efficacy, and self-efficacy is one of the most well-researched constructs when it comes to organizational psychology. It has been connected to job satisfaction, job performance, and other positive organizational behaviors for both traditional employees and entrepreneurs. Goal striving, attainment via implementation intentions. Goals, desired outcomes, are a vital part of life, and GTD can serve to facilitate both personal and professional goals. Peter Gollwitzer and Gabrielle Odingen have conducted a major line of research on goal achievement, incorporating the idea of implementation intentions. In a nutshell, they argue that the best way to ensure goal striving, taking actions toward a stated goal, is to create a cause and effect link in your mind about when certain goal-relevant actions will be taken. When you make plans, implementation intentions, ahead of time, and decide what actions will be carried out in which contexts, the proper behavior is nearly automatically enacted instead of being drawn from your limited reserve of willpower. In other words, if you can trust that something you will more or less do automatically will provide sufficient direction and juice to move you toward your outcome, you'll have that juice when needed. It won't be depleted by your constant worrying or thinking about what you should do and when. GTD and implementation intentions are linked through using the system as the trigger or prompt for taking outcome-directed action. For example, you could set the implementation intention: when I'm in my office with more than an hour of free time and a high level of energy, I'll look at my task list and select something challenging and important to work on. Or, when it is Sunday afternoon, I will conduct a weekly review. Or, when I'm feeling flustered and overwhelmed, I'll do a mental RAM dump. The number of such possible implementation intentions is truly endless. Psychological Capital, PsyCap. Psychological capital, PsyCap, is a relatively new framework within which organizational psychologists are beginning to evaluate the overall resourceful state of workers and its effect. It consists of 4 definable aspects: self-efficacy, optimism, resilience, and hope. Self-efficacy is the confidence to take on and devote the necessary effort to succeed at challenging tasks. Optimism involves making positive attributions about succeeding now and in the future. Hope means persevering toward goals and, when necessary, redirecting paths to those goals. Resilience involves bouncing back to an original, or even better, state of being after facing adversity and problems. Individually, each of these variables can predict various outcomes to a certain degree. For example, someone's degree of optimism can correlate statistically with particular results or behaviors. However, when these 4 components are considered together in what psychologists now call PsyCap, you can predict much more than merely the sum of the effects of its component elements. In its relatively short history as a construct, PsyCap has been connected to many positive individual and organizational outcomes, such as job performance and psychological well-being. PsyCap is more of a description of a state than a trait itself. That is, it is something that can change or be changed, developed or undermined almost minute to minute, as in the example of one's mood. In familiar terms, it would reflect the difference between your experiencing a good day or a bad day. Are you feeling on top of your game or buried by it? The good news is that such states are malleable. You can do things that can change and improve them without having to change some inherent aspect of yourself. Getting things done relates directly to all 4 ingredients of a high PsyCap and its intended results. By enabling people to create and maintain a complete picture of their commitments to themselves and others in order to make good decisions about what to do or not do at any given moment, it automatically builds a sense of confidence and control, self-efficacy. Simply identifying all open loops and moving them from memory to an external mind while systematically identifying concrete and doable next actions is a pure exercise in self-control and directedness. An individual utilizing GTD knows exactly what needs to be done and exactly what action he can take to achieve it, given the restrictions of available time, energy, and contextual restraints. Adopting GTD sets people up for greater optimism because it enables them to draw connections between the successful completion of projects and their own purposeful and goal-directed efforts. Individuals identify meaningful projects, articulate the next steps needed to complete them, and then ideally follow through the process until the project is completed. As each win is achieved, it produces greater capacity for making more positive commitments. In addition, the focus on front-end decision-making in GTD, doing the work to define the work, can be viewed as an exercise in both aspects of hope, setting goals and identifying pathways to those goals. Individuals set goals, what does done look like, and identify the tasks needed to achieve those goals, what's the next action, during this front-end decision-making process. While no empirical data yet exists for the idea that those individuals who utilize GTD are more successful in recovering from failure, resilience, it's certainly been validated anecdotally for me from scores of the best and brightest individuals on the planet. Dealing with serious family emergencies or tumultuous changes in their jobs and careers, people have provided abundant testimonials to attest to their retained sanity, stability, and productivity by utilizing GTD practices. The methodology gives an individual a sense of calm and control over a difficult situation that allows them to use their mental faculties to address the task at hand and recalibrate multiple vectors in real time as needed. In a time of stress and other adversity, those individuals who are able to think most clearly and process the results more efficiently will be more likely to emerge from the stress in better shape than those who do not. The PSYCAP model also provides a framework within which to understand why groups who have integrated GTD as a cultural standard experience a significant degree of moving up the food chain relative to how their organization responds, interacts, and produces results. Whether or not PSYCAP develops further as a definable, verifiable, and developmental arena in organizational psychology, it's a great way to describe the mental, emotional, reflective, and even physical benefits of what you get from using GTD. Undoubtedly, during the coming years, we will see a continual stream of new scientific data that will validate what I've known was true from day one of my experience with this model, and what has been shared by countless others. When all of our potentially meaningful things are captured, clarified, organized, and reflected upon, the more mature, elegant, and intelligent part of who we really are can show up at the table. That produces experiences and results that can't be beat. Chapter 15. The Path of GTD Mastery. GTD is actually a lifelong practice with multiple levels of mastery. It is very similar to playing an instrument like the violin, a sport like tennis, or a game like chess. It's like mathematics, pottery, art history, or even parenting. All of these endeavors involve learning and applying a particular set of moves and techniques, and there's no end to how good you can become at them, or how many subtleties there are to explore. GTD is the art of dealing with the stream of life's work and engagements, which itself is constantly evolving for all of us at any age or station. It's about identifying and navigating your commitments and interests from a state of confidence and flow. Your work and focus will change, often dramatically, over time, but engaging with all of it masterfully is a defined practice that can be learned and refined over a lifetime. Mastery does not refer to some final end state of a Zen-like peacefulness and enlightenment on a mountaintop, though that could be an optional nice expression of it. Rather, it's the demonstrated ability to consistently engage in productive behaviors as a means to achieve clarity, stability, and focus when it's desired or required, no matter what the challenge. How well you have developed that ability will be tested when you're confronted with things that are unclear, unstable, and distracting, which are natural and normal symptoms of any change in your world. The idea of mind like water doesn't assume that water is always undisturbed. On the contrary, water engages appropriately with disturbance instead of fighting against it. Over the course of life, such disturbances can range from dealing with your homework in the 6th grade, to the demands of your new job, to the vague sense of uneasiness about what to do when you retire. GTD mastery involved learning and incorporating its various best practices, and then integrating them in a holistic manner, which results in a much more dynamic experience than simply the sum of its parts. When you learn to play tennis, you focus on specific components of its moves, like the backhand, the forehand, the lob, and the serve. When you actually play a game of tennis, you then put them all together. As you increase your mastery, your focus matures to encompass an overall strategy. Similarly, mastering GTD involves an initial mastery of its segments, techniques, and tools, and then incorporating them as you play your whole life and work game. Your mastery will be reflected in your using an optimally integrated system and approach without thinking about it. The 3 tiers of mastery. Over the many years of engaging with people who have adopted the GTD methodology, I have noticed generally 3 stages of maturity they have demonstrated in using the model. 1. Employing the fundamentals of managing workflow. 2. Implementing a more elevated and integrated total life management system. And 3. Leveraging skills to create clear space and get things done for an ever-expansive expression and manifestation. A good analogy here is the experience of learning to drive a car. The first stage is getting the basics under control so that you can handle the machine without hurting yourself or anyone else. The moves feel awkward and often counterintuitive. But once you're good enough to get your license, your world changes dramatically for the better, because now you can go places and do things that you couldn't previously. Then there comes a time when you are able to drive down a road without actually thinking about the act of driving. It's become an almost automatic part of your life. And finally, you decide to graduate to a really high-performance vehicle in which the prime challenge and opportunity is how well you can focus ahead, making yourself essentially one with your vehicle, experiencing elevated levels of satisfaction and fulfillment with driving. Each of these stages is represented by the horizons of your focus and the application of specific techniques. At first, you're making what look like small, jerky movements, but what are actually very smooth movements focused on very short horizons. Then, as you gain comfort and familiarity with the process, you extend your focus to the next street corner or freeway exit. Then you can graduate to a more conscious and directed focus at multiple horizons, driving across town with total situational awareness. Similarly, as the techniques of getting things done become increasingly second nature, you shift your attention from the mechanics of your system to the results it produces. Mastering the basics. As simple as they may seem at first, building proficiency with the fundamental components of getting things done, the basics, can take a while. Though it's easy to understand and agree with its concepts and principles, putting them fully into practice is not necessarily a smooth or automatic process. It's the same as with any sophisticated practice, driving a car, throwing a karate punch, or playing the flute. The beginning moves are not familiar or comfortable. Once you've done them 1,000 times, however, you can manifest elegance, power, and fluidity that would be inaccessible any other way. The same may be true for you about learning GTD. For example, capturing everything potentially meaningful into trusted external buckets so that nothing remains rattling around in your head is a behavior that can be as daunting to employ as learning to manually shift easily in a car. As with most aspects of the GTD model, writing things down is itself not a new skill, but rather a practice that can easily seem unworthy of the effort if not downright counterintuitive. If it's not immediately important, why should I bother? Becoming sensitized to the need to externalize those kinds of thoughts, as well as building the habit to actually carry out the necessary actions with a ubiquitous tool at hand, without exception, is the real challenge. Other basic practices, which, even if implemented initially, easily regress into incomplete, out-of-date, and therefore dysfunctional usage, include next action decision-making on stuff to do, fully utilizing the waiting for category, such that every expected deliverable from others is inventoried and reviewed for follow-up in adequate timing. Using agenda lists to capture and manage communications with others. Keeping a simple, easily accessible filing and reference system. Keeping the calendar as pure, hard landscape without undermining its trustworthiness with extraneous inputs. And doing weekly reviews to keep one's system functional and current. It's easy to get off track. If you are sincere about implementing getting things done, it's actually not that difficult to get started, as I've tried to assure you with the instructions given in the earlier sections of the book. At some point, though, the rest of your reality will inevitably come flooding at you full force, and if the new practices haven't yet had time to root themselves in your behavior patterns, it's relatively easy to get blown off course. Most people are so used to keeping things in their heads that it's very easy to slip back into that familiar pattern. Deciding next actions requires a thrust of cognitive effort that seductively can be avoided if a particular situation is not in some critical mode. Making time for the weekly review, if it's not been instituted as a habit, can be a daunting challenge. All of that begins to result in a personal system that is incomplete and out of date. You'll no longer be able to trust your lists to give you the whole picture, and because the system is not really relieving pressure, you'll conclude it's not worth keeping up with anymore, and you might as well take it back into your head. In those circumstances, it's not uncommon for someone to wander off the track exponentially quickly. And it's easy to get back on. The good news is that it's as easy to get back into your productive groove as it may have been to get knocked out of it. It simply requires revisiting the basics. Get a pen and paper and empty your head again. Clean up your lists of actions and projects, identify and add new projects and next actions to bring your lists current, clean up what's leaked outside your system. This cycle of getting off track and getting back on again happens to almost everyone, particularly during this first level of mastering the basics of the game. In my experience, it can easily take as long as 2 years to finally get this stage of practice fully integrated into one's life and work style and consistently maintained. Another piece of good news is that even if a person has gleaned only a few concepts from this material, or has not implemented the system regularly, it can bring marked improvement. If you get nothing more than the 2-minute rule, it will be worth its weight in gold. If you just write down a few more things on your mind than you would have previously, you'll sleep better. If you clean up email to 0, at least every once in a while, you will have great cause for celebration. And if you simply ask, what's the next action of yourself or anyone else, when you might not have otherwise, it will add to your stress-free productivity. Of course, the more those techniques begin to work together as a whole, systematically and consistently, the more dramatic will be the increase in the experience of relaxed, focused control. Mastering the basics is transformative for most everyone who achieves it. If you reach that stage, you will be getting many more things done, more quickly and more easily, and operating with greatly increased confidence in how you're dealing with the operational details of life. At this first tier of GTD mastery, you will be generally keeping yourself under control and focused on an hour-by-hour, day-by-day basis. Graduate level, integrated life management. At this point, you are ready to graduate to the next level, having your hand on the helm of your life on a week-to-week, month-to-month, and even longer basis. This requires a more subtle level of awareness and practice. As I mentioned earlier, as you get better at driving a car, you are able to extend your horizon, which creates smoother moves, and you can focus more on where you're going than on the mechanism that's getting you there. Similarly, when you reach a certain level of maturity with the GTD process, you won't be as focused on the system itself or how you're working it, but will utilize it in more flexible, customized ways as your trusted tool to facilitate control and focus over longer and larger spans. Whereas the first level of mastery involves in-trays, meetings, email, phone calls, agendas, waiting fors, reference systems, list management, getting the right tools, etc., this next tier is concerned with getting rigorous with the bigger issues that are driving the contents of the basic level. These specific actions and information exist because of their relevance to things larger than themselves, the projects we have to complete, the problems we need to solve, the areas of focus and interest we have in our complex lives. Why are you getting that email? What's the purpose of that meeting, and why do you have to attend? What's coming up next quarter that you need to start dealing with now? What projects need to become someday maybes, and vice versa, because of some of the larger changes going on? Mastery of the fundamentals, which provides the basics of effective and efficient execution, also provides the ability and room to address a higher level of control and focus. Projects, and how they are identified, managed, and understood in relation to one another and to the larger frameworks within which we operate. Developing comfort with an external mind frees up and leverages one's cognitive abilities, paving the way for many more creative and productive uses of an integrated self-management system. The hallmarks of this next level of maturity with getting things done are a complete, current, and clear inventory of projects, a working map of one's roles, accountabilities, and interests, personally and professionally, an integrated total life management system custom-tailored to one's current needs and direction and utilized to dynamically steer out beyond the day-to-day, and challenges and surprises trigger your utilization of this methodology instead of throwing you out of it. When projects become the heartbeat of your operational system. Further down the path of mastering this methodology, you will reach a stage at which your projects list becomes more the driver rather than a reflection of your next action lists, and your projects themselves will become a truer reflection of your roles, areas of focus, and interests. At this point, the center of gravity of your self-management system will have moved from the ground-level horizon to somewhere between Horizon 1 and Horizon 2. refer to Chapter 2. Though it is central to an ongoing experience of stress-free productivity, very few people, even among those who have been engaged with getting things done for years, actually walk around with a complete inventory of their projects, objectively and regularly reviewed. Those who do reach this level, however, and come to realize its power, make that the principal list from which they navigate. Given my broad definition of project, any outcome requiring more than one step that you're committed to achieve within a year, it might be challenging enough for you to delineate all of those things, even if they are clear. Get new tires, fix the printer, find a new babysitter, etc. But the real expression of maturity here is the inclusion of the more subtle desired outcomes definable as doable events. Clarify Frank's new role on the team. Research options for improving Bettina's math grades. Resolve property boundary issue with neighbor, etc. A signpost of GTD mastery at this stage, and indeed life mastery, is when one recognizes anything that has his or her attention, concerns, worries, problems, issues, tensions, and translates them into achievable outcomes, projects, to be executed with concrete next actions. Most people resist acknowledging issues and opportunities until they know they can be handled successfully, not realizing that exploring, looking into, or in some way accepting or putting something to bed because there is no solution is an appropriate outcome or project itself. The ability to create appropriate engagement with your neighbor's boundary issue, your daughter's math grades, or the role of a new team member, no matter how ambiguous or unclear the actual path for achieving each may be, by identifying the inherent project and taking steps to resolve it, is quite an extraordinary and mature self-management practice. Assessing and populating your projects list from your areas of focus. Everything we do is serving some aspect of the roles and accountabilities we have taken on, or an area of interest and engagement in our lives. I call my brother just to check in and say hello, because family relationships is an area that has meaning for me. I buy groceries because I consider health and vitality important. I produce an agenda for a board meeting because I need to maintain corporate oversight in my role in my company. Whenever people actually produce a checklist for this horizon, the areas of professional and personal focus they can identify, they invariably realize that there are more projects they need to add. They will also usually realize that they have not been paying appropriate attention to some aspect of either their work or their personal life, or both, and they are motivated to bring more balance and wholeness to their projects list. An integrated total life management system. The third aspect of this stage of mastery is that your system will have become not just a conglomeration of various lists, information, applications, and tools, but rather a cohesive control room with all its components working together to engage effectively with whatever circumstance arises. You will have attained the ability to customize your lists and categories and how you use them in response to changes in your world and your own increasing sophistication with the possibilities. This is a reflection of a functional awareness of GTD. You understand the essence and recognize the value of the various parts of the model, and therefore have the freedom to tailor how they are implemented to best serve your needs. You could build your own application of the GTD system from scratch, if need be, with your own tools at hand. You are guided by the principle of creating and engaging with the necessary orientation maps to ensure you are appropriately focused as required for a given situation. You're not at a loss about what to do with anything. A business card you collected at a lunch meeting, a harebrained idea you woke up with this morning about a project you might want to launch, an unexpected private invitation to a major gala event, or your blood panel report from your last medical checkup. You can create the right placeholder for any type of potentially meaningful data. You can also easily get a sense of your priorities for an upcoming trip. You have everything you need at hand for the next webinar you're conducting. It would take minimal effort to pull together a company overview for your bank, and you can quickly create a rich context for a family conversation about plans for the next 2 years. You have a dynamic, working dashboard that serves your orientation for virtually any context, whether at home, at the office, or in transit, seamlessly. Pressure produces greater rather than reduced utilization of these practices. One of the most common observations I hear from people who have at some point bought into the GTD process but have not progressed particularly far with it is that they fell away from it because they had an intense series of back-to-back business trips, or an extended bout of the flu, or an unexpected crisis occurred with a major client, or were asked to run a major project in addition to their regular job, and so on. And one of the most common things I hear from people who have matured with their application of and experience with the methodology is that applying getting things done is the very thing that enabled them to negotiate these kinds of tense situations with much more effectiveness and much less stress. So, a significant hallmark of progress in the path of mastery at this stage is that very transition point when issues and opportunities galvanize GTD practices instead of causing its users to abandon them. When a new problem explodes at work, you can get back in control quickly with a new mind sweep instead of taking everything back up into your head. You identify desired outcomes, projects, and next actions about this circumstance as soon as you can, as opposed to simply worrying about what's happened. You actually do a weekly review in the middle of the week because you need that kind of elevated focus to recalibrate your work instead of reverting back to latest and loudest as your priority criterion. Operating at this level of GTD mastery is achievable and truly elegant. The experience, for those who do achieve it, is one of establishing the conditions to flourish. What flourish means and looks like for a 24-year-old rock musician will likely be very different than for a 54-year-old attorney with 3 kids, but the expanded experience and the process of how they got there with GTD are identical. Postgraduate. Focus, direction, and creativity. Once you have incorporated the basic elements of getting things done and integrated the more elevated aspects of your commitments of life and work into a trusted and customized systemic approach, the next frontier opens, using clear internal space to optimize your experience ad infinitum. This mastery level involves 2 key aspects. First, utilizing your freed-up focus for exploring the more elevated aspects of your commitments and values. And second, leveraging your external mind to produce novel value. Freedom to engage in the most meaningful things. Once you really know and trust you can and will execute effectively anything that lands in your in-tray, you will have the freedom to toss anything into your own in-tray, whether it's your next crazy idea, a possible new technology to research, a book you might want to write, or an NGO website that almost brought you to tears that you'd like to support. The power to produce produces powerful possibilities. One of my favorite sayings is, the better you get, the better you'd better get. The more confidence you have that you can actually manifest things before you have all the knowledge and resources you might need, the more you can potentially overwhelm yourself with your own possibilities. So, the clarity and confidence that your GTD practices allow simultaneously demand their ongoing utilization. And, as I hope I've made clear throughout this book, the ability to put your attention on the more subtle and elevated levels of your life and work to a large degree depends on your being able to put to bed the inevitably necessary more operational and mundane aspects that, without your appropriate engagement, can easily distract and exhaust your creative focus. I applaud the people who can sufficiently compartmentalize their consciousness to be able to draft a movie script, craft a vision statement for their NGO, or write the perfect poem for their wedding vows, with all the stuff of unanswered emails, crashed computer, taxes to be filed, mother-in-law's complaints about the wedding program, and needed bank credit line extension still impinging on their psyches. I do know that if all those issues were quieted with appropriate engagement from a GTD perspective, the space and inspiration for the more creative activities would be tremendously enhanced. The negative effect on focus and performance of the cognitive load of these kinds of open loops has now been documented. Many people attest to their ability to leave work at work and drop everything to focus on the creative pursuits that interest them, but in my experience, that's only because they don't have a reference point of what their lives would be like without that pressure to begin with. The lack of pervasive angst about the details of your daily life also makes it much easier to shift your attention to the direction and qualities of experience that really matter. As I indicated in Chapter 2, the upper horizons of focus, goals, vision, purpose, and principles, are the defining criteria for your priorities. But most people find the ability to concentrate on and execute them effectively elusive at best and avoided, and guilt-producing at worst. A distraction-free mind won't by itself get you to think about wild success scenarios 5 years in the future. You still have to consciously direct your attention to those matters, but it does make it infinitely easier to engage in such an exercise productively. Leveraging your external mind. Once you are regularly functioning at this level of mastery, the creative thrust of your GTDing shifts from implementing the most effective way of dealing with the inputs and inherent demands of your day-to-day world to optimally taking advantage of self-created contexts and triggers to produce creative ideas, perspectives, and actions that wouldn't normally occur. For instance, if you have ever needed to purge and bring up to date a contact manager, as you've reviewed old and potentially out-of-date entries of people and businesses, you've invariably come across items that caused you to tell yourself, I really ought to get in touch with her again, given what I'm now doing in my business. If that kind of catalyzed thought has ever turned into something in any way valuable, then you've tasted at least a tiny bit of what could be infinitely more utilized. How many more ideas could any of us have had today that would have potentially added value to some aspect of our relationships, work, and creative expressions, had we only brought the right things into our conscious focus with the ability to capture what might show up? This highly creative and productive reflection activity automatically occurs in something like the weekly review, when you are glancing at past and future calendar items. Oh, that reminds me. And updating your projects and next actions lists. Ah, now I need to. Regularly assessing your someday maybe contents offers an even more expansive berth. I think I really am going to take a painting class. But how many other aspects of your experience and relationships could be enhanced with the same kind of triggers for reflection? What other contents, reviewed with some consistency, might reveal valuable ideas? It's challenging enough to build in regular catch-up behaviors, but the possibilities of going beyond them are endless. This is the stage of maturity along the GTD path of mastery in which the simple idea of checklists takes on sublime significance. As cognitive scientists have validated, your mind is terrible at recalling things out of the blue, but it is fantastic at doing creative thinking about what it has directly in front of it to evaluate. When freed from the remembering function, the mind is a fabulous mechanism to put in play by putting things in front of the door, so you don't have to think too hard about what to think about. How often would you like to be reminded to think about your significant family members? What specifically would be good to remind yourself to think about when you think about your partner, your son, your sister? Whom would you consider to be on your A list in your professional network, the people whose influence and interactions with you are most valuable? How often should you review that list? What affirmations and inspirational writings would serve you to reconnect with, and at what intervals? There are obviously an infinite number of opportunities any of us could take advantage of to add value to our world, with the right kind of structure established to relieve our psyche of the jobs it does not do well and to leverage what it does wonderfully. But that will not happen by itself. It is a hallmark of this advanced level of GTD mastery that you recognize that dynamic and use your intelligence to leverage itself. It's having the freedom to generate and develop ideas without constraint, and then utilizing the practice of processing and organizing those notes and thoughts appropriately. It's the smartest individuals who realize they are only randomly in their smarts and inspired. They're the ones who intelligently build in systems and processes to take advantage of the brilliance that often simply lies sleeping behind the dullness required to deal with the brutish world we inhabit. This path of GTD mastery, incorporating the fundamentals, utilizing an elevated and integrated system, and leveraging creative directional focus, is not actually as limited sequentially as I have laid it out. Most everyone manifests aspects and portions of all of these levels in his or her own practices, and I have often met novices in some field who had some extraordinarily advanced moves. But in my experience, When the whole gestalt of stress-free productivity is taken into consideration, it requires a solid progression that does not have shortcuts. You can't really maintain a sense of week-to-week control if your email is in chaos. You won't really be free to engage with your long-range planning or vision if you don't have a grip on the current reality of the actual inventory of your 75 projects. You are continually involved in all of these levels, consciously or unconsciously, explicitly or implicitly. You have appointments, projects, actions, goals, and values, and as a professional you will find that your work has its own set of commitments within which you must operate. Your mastery of getting things done will simply reflect the elegant equanimity with which you are engaged with all of them. The unexpected email with the major problem that just appeared, your Aunt Martha's birthday this week, the potential change in strategy for your company, and the new piece of cookware you realize you want. Each is dealt with quickly, smoothly, and in an appropriate context, leaving nothing on your mind other than what's present in the moment. Conclusion. I hope this book has been useful, that you have started to reap the rewards of getting more done with less effort and stress. And I really hope you have tasted the freedom of a mind like water and the release of your creative energies that can be the result of the application of these techniques. Those who begin to implement GTD methods always discover there's more here than meets the eye, and you may have already begun to experience your own version of that. I'm willing to bet that getting things done has validated much of what you already know and have been doing to some degree in your personal and professional life all along. Perhaps, though, this book will make it much easier for you to apply that common sense more systematically in a world that seems to increasingly confound us with its intensity and complexity. My intent is not to add more to the plethora of modern theories and models about how to be successful. I have tried, on the contrary, to define the core methods that don't change with particular fashions, and that, when applied, always work. As with gravity, when you understand the basic principle, you can operate a lot more effectively no matter what you're doing. Perhaps this is the leading edge of back to basics. Getting things done is a roadmap to achieve the positive, relaxed focus that characterizes your most productive state. I invite you to use it, like a roadmap, as a reference tool to get back there whenever you need to. Here are some final tips for moving forward. Get your personal physical organization hardware set up. Get your workstation organized. Get in trays. Create a workable and easily accessed personal reference system for work and home. Get a good list management organizer that you are inspired to play with. Give yourself permission to make any changes that you have been contemplating for enhancing your work environments. Hang pictures, buy pens, toss stuff, and rearrange your workspace. Support your fresh start. Set aside time when you can tackle one whole area of your office and then each part of your house. Gather everything into your system and work through the getting things done process. Share anything of value you've gleaned from this with someone else. It's the fastest way to learn. Review getting things done again in 3 to 6 months. You'll notice things you might have missed the first time through, and I guarantee it will seem like a whole new book. Stay in touch with people who are broadcasting and reflecting these behaviors and standards. We're available. Visit gettingthingsdone.com anytime for tons of free support material, conversations and stories about these best practices from people like you, current information about supportive products and services, and access to our global network of people sharing in this